Hey guys, I'm Professor Wright over at Eastern New Mexico University, and today I'm going to do a quick demo video for you of how to get started at least on a coil built piece. You can pretty much take this from here and build whatever you want to. You should look at the assignment that I've given online, if I've given you that, and just know that either way you go, this kind of starting video and kind of discussion of the process will cover either one. But yeah, we're going to do coil pots, and again, some of this I may have gone over in person with you because this is not a video for a hybrid. It's not a fully online class, it's hybrid. So some things that I talk about, like wedging and wrapping your piece of plastic, I'll teach you in class. But in any case, and there's other videos that cover some of that. So yeah, starting again, this is your coil built pot or sculpture assignment that I'm going to cover how to start with. Try to cover all the tips and tricks and for how to get through all the whole thing. But first off, I want to talk about the tools that you're going to need. Obviously, the first thing you're going to need is clay that is nice and wedged up, ready to go. Doesn't have to be wedged quite as well as if you're throwing, but you do need to wedge. If you need to know how to wedge, I should have already showed you in class. You should have seen that demo, but if you missed it, you can look it up online or ask your classmates or whoever's standing in for me to talk about it if you missed it. But yeah, wedging should be something you already covered. So wedged clay, ready to go, pretty good amount of it. You also are going to need water, a bucket or cup of water and slip, not just water, but a little bit of slip that either you keep yourself or you just refill it each day, whatever. You're going to need that, and then you're going to need things to cut and kind of change the length and like maneuver your coils. And you have two options. You can use the needle tool or the fettling knife. Needle tool is in the bucket, either on the baker's rack, or a lot of times I'll just keep it in this room. And then the fettling knife stays on the baker's rack over by the sink in the other side of the room, and it's in a little cup on the bottom. These are nice for really clean, flat cuts. Needles are better for smaller cuts, like more in a moment. Yeah, you'll just have to find out your preference. Then you might also, for slipping and scoring, you're going to want either a serrated metal rib, which means it has teeth on it, or you want one of these kind of metal brush needle tool type things for slipping and scoring. We're going to talk about what that means and why it is so important. It's part of like the whole point of the coil pot assignment is me teaching you how to slip and score. So you're going to want both of those, and then you're probably also going to want a flat metal rib, one without teeth, for shaping and smoothing the surface. There is a flat side on the serrated metal rib. But it's kind of nice to have both if there's enough for the whole class and stuff. You can share and stuff like that too. So yeah, there's your tools. These are going to be in the tub in the classroom or on the baker's rack on the other side of the room. Later on, when you're done, if your piece dries out and you want to smooth it, you might want to use one of these Scotch-Brite pads or like a green just dish sponge. You use these dry to sand a fully bone dry piece. You should know based on the slides what bone dry, leather hard, and just greenware, some of the general states of clay. You should already know this based on the slides that I put in this assignment, so be sure you're aware of that. But yeah, when it's bone dry, you can use these sponges dry to kind of sand. If it's still leather hard, you would just use a regular yellow ceramic sponge for that. But anyway, there's a separate video on how to clean up pots when they're dry and finish them, or as they're leather hard, whatever. Yeah, just how to finish pots. So look for that later. But yeah, you may also want a rolling pin, depending on how you start your clay, but it's not necessary, or your coil piece. It's not necessary though, but just something to think about having ready. So anyway, I'm trying to think if there's any other tools, towel, of course, that kind of stuff. But you want to be ready to, yeah, just jump right in. You can, you also definitely want a board. You don't want to work directly on the table, certainly for building the slab or building the coil piece. You want to work on a board, typically a smaller one that you could maybe even fit on a banding wheel, which is really handy to use while coil building. Just our Lazy Susan type deals we have in the cabinet. You can use that, or I like to work on these large canvas boards, but you should know they're a little big to fit on the banding wheels, but also we don't have enough for everybody to keep them on their shelf. So if you work on this, you need to transfer to a smaller board, one of the ones we keep in the cabinets, and you'll keep that on your shelf. This is just for working, but I have it out here for you guys today. So anyway, yeah, let's talk about how to get started. So getting started with your coil piece, we'll come back to the slipping and scoring thing kind of in the middle of this process, but it is a really important part of this video. But yeah, for now, let's just act like we're going to go ahead and start our coil pot. So first off, we want to think about our base for the coil piece, okay? So one thing I say, it's one of my tips in the assignment, and I'm always kind of crazy about this, is you don't want to start your coil piece with coils. The bottom, right, the flat part that's going to be what touches the table should not be coils. That sort of method, I've seen students do what I call like the lollipop method, or sometimes I call it the cow patty method. But yeah, it's the lollipop method where essentially you start with a coil and you just wrap it on itself and you make this little spiral of coil. And it can be really cute. The problem is because they're horizontal connections and there is resistance, as your piece sits on the table and it shrinks and moves, there's going to be resistance from the surface tension on whatever it's sitting, and it often pulls apart all of the seams in those. It's pretty much a 100% thing that I'll tell you. If you do the lollipop bottom, you're going to get cracks. Now, if you're making a planter or there's going to be gaps in a piece anyway, and you prefer that aesthetically, that kind of doesn't matter. But you should know, yeah, if you want the bottom to be sealed, you should not start with a coil. You need to start with a patty of clay, or really, for lack of a better word, a slab of clay. You'll learn more about slabs in the slab assignment, but basically what I'm going to teach you today is how to start with a very small basic slab, not using slab roll or anything, just a hand rolled slab. So for this, what I want is to get a little bit of clay, and there's a few options. There's the patty cake option for how to start the base of your coil piece. Basically, it's just what I call like kind of pushing out the slab, or yeah, the slab, little patty cake, right? Slab, push it out or punch it out, right? You can work from both sides. You can do that. There is the slab method and some other things you'll learn more about when making slabs for the slab assignment. But for today, I'm just going to mainly talk about kind of pushing this out by hand, and then maybe if you want, you could also use a rolling pin, okay? You just need to be sure, don't try to like make a little patty that's exactly the shape of whatever you're going to do just yet. Just make a nice sheet of clay that is plenty big enough for your base, okay? Use the rolling pin going different directions. It just helps. Same for your pushing down with your patty. Go different directions. Don't just try to stretch it all in one way. This is a big part of keeping your base from warping. Along with compression, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But yeah, if you just stretch your clay out in multiple different directions, it feels less stretched out and less tense, right? The clay, if you just stretch it in one way, it has this tendency to, like a rubber band, it wants to pull back up to its original shape, and it'll sort of warp. But if you pull in different directions, it helps avoid some of that. But the other thing that helps avoid some of that is compression. Not everybody does it. I think anytime you're making a flat piece of clay, it's going to be pretty important. I'll go much more into depth with compression on slabs, but even for just starting this little patty for coils, it's helpful to do. To compress, all you do is take your metal rib, one that's smooth, or any kind of rib, right, that is smooth. You can do it with a wooden rib. You just don't want a toothed one. But you're going to kind of just sort of scrape the surface, basically smoothing it. Think of it like you're pushing down. You're not making it thinner. You're just sort of pushing down and smoothing it, making the particles like more dense. And again, same sort of deal, that I'm going different directions, and then I'm going to do it on both sides. Now, typically for a coil piece, this patty or slab that you're making is not going to be super big, so you don't have to be perfect at this, but it's kind of handy to get the hang of doing this even with starting your coil piece. But essentially, yeah, it's just a way to get a nice even start to your base for your coil piece. There's also things you can do, grab like some sticks or something that we have around the studio that you set on either side of your patty as you're rolling your rolling pin, that will make it nice and even, all that kind of stuff. I'll talk more about it in the slab rolling demo. Because again, you don't have to be perfect at making this little patty. You just want essentially a nice flat base for your coil, like I said several times now. Okay, anyway, moving on. I've got this sort of set up. It's ready to go. It's not the lollipop thing. I didn't make this out of a coil. It's a nice sheet. And then I could just make a small base, or what I like to do is something like a little bit bigger for this demo. And then I also, if you'll notice, I tend to, when I do my demos here, I like to make them not just circular in terms of shape upward, right? Not just a cylinder, because keep in mind, when hand building, that's one of the fun things you can do, is go out of just being round. When you learn to use the wheel, everything is round. So it's a good chance when hand building to sort of play around with that with coils and slabs, kind of changing the shape. But in any case, yeah, I've got my base here. It's ready to go. And now let's talk about how to roll coils. Now, rolling it's just like you might have done when you're a kid. You're going to roll little snakes or ropes of clay that you're going to stack up. That's essentially what coil building is. I haven't really defined that so far in this video, but I should say, yeah, coil building is where we essentially are going to make ropes of clay that we stack up and build up to get height. We just continually stack up these ropes or snakes of clay. So it's essential to learn how to roll out these coils. Okay, you should already have kind of known all that from the slides, but just to reiterate that. So now I'm going to get started on rolling this. I like to roll on these tables, but if you're using really wet clay, or if you ever need to wet this at any point, the table becomes unusable, right? Because it's vinyl, the clay will start to stick to it. It's much better if you can to roll on the canvas boards or on your board. So the problem is that they're usually not wide enough. What's nice about the canvas ones too is you can spray them with a spray bottle and roll, and it keeps your clay from drying out too much. But it also won't stick because it's canvas. So I don't know, you got a couple options there, but I like to just roll on the table, but I got to be careful not to let it get too stuck to the table or anything like that. But anyway, when I'm ready, I essentially take the clay, I make it into a little turd log here, kind of already have it shaped into like a fat, uneven coil, and then I just start rolling it on the table. And one of the things to think about is it's not really so much your hand pressure that shapes these coils. It's just the fact that they're rolling across the table. Now, if your clay is drier, you might have to use more pressure, okay? This is starting to get, it's a little thick, and I know it's gonna be very long. So I'm gonna cut this in half already and be able to use it for multiple coils. But yeah, I'm starting to get it a little bit smoother. It's not very round right now, but that's okay because it's quite large still, and I'm gonna work it down into a nice straight rope. Now, I have a couple tips for how to do this a little bit better. You will find it is not as easy as it seems. You will be very frustrated. There will be finger marks. It'll be lumpy. It'll just, you won't like it, and you just need to keep practicing and be patient. But I do have a few tips. Number one, I tend to say you can use two hands, but keep them together. Do not separate your hands. A lot of people like to do this sort of thing where they work from the middle outward. And if you do it right, it might work, but there's a tendency for beginners, their hands get a little bit off and then whoop, they tear it right in the middle. They go opposite directions or something, and they'll tear their coil. So it's much better, I say, if you're going to use two hands, to kind of keep them locked together. Or if you can, it's pretty nice to learn how to roll just sort of one-handed, right? And it's just about keeping your hand flat and using good pressure. Your coil should roll like this, where it sort of all rolls at once. If you're having issues with one end sort of staying flat while the other end you're rolling, you need to stop and sort of reassess what's going on. You might have stuck this down, it might be too wet, there may be some other issue going on, because it shouldn't be something where when you roll on this side, only this side moves and this side stays. It needs to all roll at once, like you're seeing here with mine. Okay, another thing is try to roll from your fingertips to your palms, okay? And go side to side. Don't just stay in one place. Keep moving, right? Oh, I already made this long enough. It's hitting my little board here. But yeah, we roll from the fingertips all the way to the base of the palms. I'm not just rolling with my fingers. I'm not just rolling with my palms. Those kind of tend to create lumpy bits. But yeah, I'm just kind of scooting. You can see my left brain is kicking and I'm having a harder time articulating. But yeah, you can see just rolling, tip to palm, back and forth. And I always try to say this, and I don't know, I've learned different ways to describe rolling slabs through the years. For one thing, if you ever are rolling it, you're getting this like you'll feel this like rhythm, and you'll see it sort of squaring out or changing shape. You'll end up like it's oval or something. That's because you're pressing too hard or because you're pressing too soft. I don't really have any. This is a Goldilocks situation where you just have to find the right piece, the right pressure for rolling your coil. And I hate to say this, but every piece of clay is going to be different depending on its moisture content. Sometimes you need to press harder, sometimes you need to press lighter. But one thing that really helps is remembering that what's rounding it is the table. It's the rolling action. And actually, I'll also say the stretching comes from sort of the sideways pressure. it's not as much my downward pressure, right? That's a great way to end up with that lumpy, like, is really focus on pressing down. What you should really think about is the sideways pressure as I move my hands. That's what I found helped me. There may be other answers from other more experienced hand builders than me, but yeah, that's my experience. And I think this is a pretty nice round coil, and you can see it's not tearing apart, doesn't have too many kinks or weak spots. It's good to go. Also, you'll see it's about pinky thickness. It's a little thicker than my pinky, and that's about as thin as you want to go. Something that I see students do a lot before they start building is they want these really perfect coils, which is something you should just get rid of the idea of. And the other thing they want is super thin, like dainty coils. But don't make your pot too thin. After making sure the base is not a coiled up like lollipop thing, my next most important piece of advice would be making sure it's not too thin. These are hand-built things. Nobody's expecting them to be super paper thin or light. Actually, we use stoneware, which you don't want super thin anyway. You want to make sure that, especially at the bottom, where you're going to put the coil down and then you're going to keep stacking on top, right? And there's more and more weight going down there. You don't want those bottom coils to be super spindly and thin. You want them to be nice and sturdy, okay? So be sure you're thinking about that and not making them too thin, all right? Notice I didn't really pay that much attention or think too much about the length of my coil. I just made it as long as I could with that piece of clay that I grabbed. And what I'm going to do is, as I use this, I'll cut it to shape as needed. We'll get more to that in a minute. I'm trying to think of anything else I need to say in terms of keeping smooth. I think we're good to start attaching this here, right? So I've got my coil set up here. Notice, oh yeah, if it keeps cracking and having issues, you might take a little water, just use your finger to sort of smooth out your coil. But again, remember, now I can't really use this table because it'll get sticky and stuck and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, think about it. Yeah, I think we're pretty good, not too thin here, ready to go. Let's talk a little bit about how slipping and scoring goes. So I will, before I attach this coil down, I will cut one side kind of nice and flat with my fettling knife or rib. Yeah, that's just to basically make sure this is nice and flat. I should have already explained, I keep using the term rib, assuming you guys know, I should have already explained what all the tools are in class, hopefully that, but you can always look up the terms if you need to or refer to slides. But in any case, yeah, I cut one side flat, I get ready, and now let's talk about slipping and scoring. So slipping and scoring is what you do anytime that you want to attach two pieces of clay. And you need to slip and score both pieces of clay. Both surfaces that are going to attach need to be slipped and scored. And essentially what it is slip is liquid clay. It's clay that's more liquid, it's more water than it is clay, and it's like kind of goopy clay. Yeah, and you can kind of see them. See if I can grab some here. Yeah, if I have it, yeah, you can kind of see it here on my fingertips. It's watery clay that I will be able to use as a sort of glue. Basically, that's what slip is. And scoring just means scratching. That applies to any use of the term with paper, with wood, with anything. Scoring just means like scratching, essentially. And so you're scratching and putting slip in to act as a glue. And this scoring concept is basically just to rough up the surface. You don't have to be very exact. I hear people talking about it as like a zipper and all this kind of stuff. It's not really like that. It's just roughing up the surface, getting a little gloopy clay in there, both sides, and then pushing them together. But that's not all there is to it. You also have to use pressure. Be sure, you're not going to be able to just set the attachment down lightly and think that the slipping and scoring by itself is going to make it stick. You're going to have to use good pressure to be sure it is really stuck. So, in any case, let me go ahead and get started on that. So I'm going to go ahead and score and slip the entire length of my coil. Oh, something on slipping and scoring. I need to keep going a little bit on this. So when it comes to making the slipping and scoring activity itself, you have a few options, right? As far as like how you score, how you scratch up the surface. So my favorite, if you can't tell because I already just jumped in here, is to use that serrated toothed rib that I talked about a minute ago. This is really nice. It's my favorite because I can pick up slip and actually score and slip at the same time, and that's pretty nice. But it's not your only option, right? If you don't like the way these feel, they're uncomfortable, or you don't feel like good control, you can use that brush wire tool that I talked about a minute ago. It's like it's on a needle tool handle, but then it has a wire brush on the end. And you can do the same thing, grab your slip, score, scratch, right? Just moving down. And this is actually cool because you can go all different directions which is kind of nice for the scoring process, for roughing it up, versus just the rib. But yeah, that's one way you can do it. And then some people, right, honestly, you don't have to overthink it. It's just scratching. You can just use the needle tool. And the needle tool is fine, but there's a big reason I don't like the needle tool personally. The number one is, if I'm scoring, look at this. I'm going to scratch, score, right? And it takes me several seconds just to get 3 or 4 inches of good score marks down the line. Compare that to what you saw a second ago, where I took my metal rib with teeth and I can do the whole thing in a few seconds. So that's the big one. The other thing with the needle tool is I find students tend to score too deep. But yeah, you can use just like a butter knife, you can use forks, use anything that's going to scratch up the surface will work. But yeah, just those are the options we have here in this classroom. Yeah, but you want to be sure you scratch and slip both sides, right? So score and slip both. Let me get more slip out. I like to do this thing when I'm working on a board where I like make a little pile of slip, and I can always kind of reach back to it. And again, I like to slip and score at the same time. There's nothing that says, say you can't find one of these tooth ribs and you got to use a needle tool or something. What you can do is just take your slip and sort of rub it on the surface first, and then take whatever tool and scratch after, right? That works too. But in any case, the most important thing that you're doing is getting a good gloopy slip. Also, be sure, don't use water. It's not water and slip. It's not water and score. It's slip and score, right? We need good gloopy slip to act as good glue here, right? And I've done the whole thing now. It's ready to go. Right, so it might have dried a little bit. I could refresh this, right? I'd be working faster if I wasn't demoing. But yeah, there we go. It's ready. I've scored the whole thing, the base and the coil. And now I'm going to take my coil and start setting it down. And something you're going to notice I didn't do is I didn't measure the coil to fit this base. And I'll talk about why we do that here in just a minute. So anyway, I'm going to lay this down first. So notice as I'm setting this down, I'm not just like daintily like laying this down. I'm actually like pushing down this. There's nothing wrong with being dainty, by the way. I'm just saying in this case, we want to use some pressure, some good oomph here. We want to push the two slipped and scored sides together, set them down, and then give a little push. I like to do a little shake almost and push, but just really be sure it's good and stuck together, right? This is another reason not to get too caught up in doing perfect coils, because if you're doing this part right, where you're joining the coils onto the base or onto each other, you're gonna distort the coils a little bit. It's just gonna happen. So yeah, it's just a good idea to not get too caught up on making perfect coils, and just know you're going to kind of misshape them and change them. Just, don't get too caught up on being perfect with this. Now, if you want to, you can, but you got to be more careful in this step. But you still need to use that pressure. Anyway, I've just been vamping and talking while I add this in. And now notice, yes, my coils come around and I have a lot of excess. And what I'm going to do, I'm not going to overthink it or freak out. All I got to do is cut this to be nice and flat. Then I'm going to slip and score the ends just a little bit. Go together. Join them, and boom, there you go. Nice and easy. Got that base on there, or this first coil on that base, I should say. Yeah, and it didn't really matter that I didn't cut this to form. So let me talk a little bit about why I don't try to measure it first and then stick it down. The main reason is because as I'm sticking this down, if I'm using good pressure, like we said, distorting the coil a little bit and getting it in place, as I'm pushing, it might be sort of, it's going to stretch and make your coil a little bit longer as you move around the form, right? So essentially, what I see happen all the time is students that measure their coil to fit perfectly on the base, and then they'll go to stick it down, and they'll move it around, they'll keep pushing, and they'll get great pressure. It's nice and stuck. And then when they get over here to this side, they'll notice there's excess, right? It'll only be ½ inch, an inch, right, of excess. But they, in their mind, because they aren't prepared to do the cutting thing and slicing and sticking together, like I said, with the excess, they're like, I measured it, it's gonna fit perfect. And they stick those two ends together, and then they push, and essentially what happens is they've made a coil that now is slightly too big for the base, and it's kind of moved out, right? And doing that once isn't necessarily the big thing, but if they keep doing that, each time they do it, your coil, right, each time they measure, and they're like, well, I measured it, and it's excess, and they stick it, and it's too big, they're gonna see their coil pot get wider and wider. Instead of, like, if they're trying to stack it up straight, they need to do what I did, where I talked about, yeah, you stick it down and then cut it to fit perfectly. Don't try to measure it and then stick it together, because yeah, that's the tendency, is for it to be a little too big, and since the student it's only slightly too big, they force it, they know they measured it, and they'll do it over and over again, and that little bit too big starts to become way too big, and they'll have walls that move outward. Okay, I don't know if that made a lot of sense, but that's my best explanation for why you, like I said, don't try to measure it and then stick it down. Just stick down more than enough coil and then cut it when you get to the other end. Okay, the other thing you want to do as far as tips, just while I'm talking about it, is make sure when we start our next layer, I'm just going to stick a little bit of this remaining coil down, but I'm going to stick this, I'm going to slip and score it again, slip and score it. For the top of these, I actually do really like the metal brush thing for the actual coils themselves. But yeah, I'm going to slip and score again, and let's pretend that this coil I'm about to stick down is plenty long enough. What you need to think about when you go to stick this down is make sure, right, the last row, or the last level of coil, I started right here. I want to be sure I don't start it in that same spot. I want to move across the shape a little bit and actually stick it down somewhere over here. Oops, I didn't score enough. That's okay. And be sure this is not quite enough slip. Be sure you're using enough slip. Okay. Okay, stuck it down, sticking it down. Yeah, and notice, yeah, like I said, let's pretend this was long enough and I came all the way around. But the big thing is the start and joint where I'm gonna finish this after this layer of coil is not in the same spot as the one before it. If you make it in the same spot as the one before it, you'll have two possibilities. One, there's a tendency for students, they have a little subtle thin spot where they started that layer before, and then if they keep stacking on top of it, you'll get this dip in your wall, okay? That's frustrating. And you can also have the opposite, where it's a little thick where you started, and you'll have a big hump in the wall. And so neither of those is good, and it's easiest just to avoid that by starting each layer in a different spot, okay? Now, I've got this all sort of pinned down, and now I want to talk about how to smooth these out. So for my assignments, I typically tell students it is up to them if they want to let the outside of their piece remain like the coil texture, right? If they want to leave this, they like that sort of thing, they like those layers, they like viewing it, and that's okay if they want to leave that. But the inside of their coil piece needs to be smoothed together. I have just taught this long enough that I know if I don't teach students to smooth out one of the walls, it is going to come apart. Okay, it's just this, these coils are round and they're just barely touching in the spot. Even though we use good pressure, it's not a real thick area or large surface area of slipped and scored joinery. So we want to, basically smooth in one of these to make it better. I actually recommend both sides, right? You always do the inside, but I recommend smoothing out the outside as well. You can even do something where you smooth out the outside and then go back and reiterate or make new coil surfaces, and that's sort of fine. But for the most part, I recommend smoothing in inside and out. To smooth the inside, you're going to want to use a stick tool, or for this instance, I'm going to just use the back of the needle tool and essentially push down the coil. I don't know if you can see this, but you can sort of get it through my tongue. You're going to push this coil down onto the base and smooth it. You can also use the metal rib thing. This is for the inside because it's a little trickier. One thing I do want to say is a lot of students have this idea that they're going to build up their whole coil piece and then smooth out the inside at the end, but that's not going to work because there's a good chance by the time you're done, you're not going to be able to reach these lower levels. So when it comes to smoothing in the joints of the coils, you want to basically do this every 2 or 3 coils, right? You want to do it pretty regularly. You don't want to wait till the end and then try to do it all at once. It just won't work, okay? And it just gets too tricky to fit your hand and the tools and all that stuff down there. So you want to do it, like I said, every 2 or 3 coils. Smooth this in. I'm just going to carry this around. I'm just going to use my finger on a lot of this and show you what I'm sort of talking about as far as the inside goes, how this works, right? You can do the same thing as you use the stick tool, not just to join it to the base, but join the coils to each other, get them very smoothed in, right? You can use water to help you with getting this. You can, like I said, just use a stick tool. You can use a brush tool, use all sorts of things, but you really want to join these together, right? And use a little bit of water on your finger to smooth these out. Let me pick this up and carry it closer to the camera so you can see what I'm talking about. See how this is all kind of joined together. That's what we want on the inside, all the way up, right? You got to do this, stop and smooth in the coils as you go the whole time. Now let me talk to you about how to smooth the outside. It's even easier. This is one of my favorite things to demo. It's so simple. With the metal rib with teeth, I'm going to take this, dip it in water, and I'm going to do what we call raking across the coils, and I'm just going to essentially go all different directions, smooth the coils into each other. The teeth grab clay, put it into the gap between the coils, and then kind of spread it as it moves up. Let me show, yeah, you should be able to kind of see what I'm doing there. That looks really good. Now you might not like that texture. Some people really love it and like to leave it there. Like me, I like to leave at least some of it, leave it kind of rough. But then, once you've done that, if you want the smooth surface, right? And remember, on the outside here, you don't have to. You can leave the coils showing, but again, it's not going to be as strong as if you do both the inside and out. Let me show you now. Okay, I've raked it. I've got that texture. I've got the coil smooth together. You can't even see that seam. And then you can do this thing where you take the straight side of the serrated rib, or you can grab the straight metal rib, and you just smooth that in. Whoa, cool. See how smooth that is? And you can't even see where those coils joined anymore. That is what we want. And you can do that all the way up to shape. Yeah, moving around. On the inside, it's ideal if you can get as close to that as you can, but obviously with your fingers and like a stick tool, it's not going to be quite as smooth, but hopefully that's not as much of an issue because it's on the inside. But yeah, this will just make the strongest kind of joint surface. What else was I going to say? Oh, if you're really good, if you like spackling or like plaster work, anything like that, you can kind of make really cool textures while doing this too. That's my favorite thing to do. But yeah, that is essentially how you do this. Now, I'm going to stop building there and just talk about some tips and things. But yeah, essentially just keeping that going is going to be your best bet. There's some other maneuvers you might have to learn, like how to close off a shape, right? Which is just making your coil smaller and smaller so it closes. I could show you that, or we could talk about it online or in class, depending on if I'm around. But you can also, I did want to talk a little bit about, let's say you're making just a traditional vase and you want the shape to go outward. Remember the phenomenon I was saying earlier about like if students measure and the coil gets a little too big and they keep it there, it'll make your walls go outward. You can do that on purpose, right? You can purposely make sure that as you're moving each coil level upward, that the coil that you're adding is a little bit wider than the coil below it. Just a little. You don't want to go all at once because you'll build out too fast and it'll slump over. But if you want to make your coil just a little bit bigger than the one below it, it'll help you, like every time you do that, every layer, it'll keep building outward into like sort of a V shape. And the reverse is also true. Let's say you want to go in like a bottleneck, you do the same thing where you make each coil a little bit smaller. It's like the same, but in reverse, a little bit smaller than the one below it. Again, just a little bit, not all at once. And you set that down, you slip and score, you smooth them out, and it'll just slowly help you build back inward like an A shape, right, or like a bottleneck, okay? Those are both options, but be aware of it. Now, again, be sure that you make your coils thick enough that you can continue building up. You can go pretty quick while building with coils, and something you want to think about is if you're getting really large pretty quick, like in the same day, you might have to stop and take a break to let the lower layers dry up. Especially one thing I forgot to say too is when you're slipping and scoring, you want to use enough that it's a really good joint. I said to use a lot, but if you use too much, it might make your coils so soft and sloppy that as you add stuff, it just keeps squishing down and it will not stand up. They just get so soft that they're sort of compromised. So be sure you don't use too much slip or water during the smoothing or joining processes. Be sure that you, as you build, if you are using water and some stuff like that, like I said, let the lower layers stiffen up a little bit. You don't want them to get dry, but you want them to almost get to like leather hard stage, which, as you learn hopefully in the slides, is sort of like half dry, where it's still cold to the touch, it's still kind of squishy, but it's a little firmed up, right? And so you can keep adding and keep adding. If you're still working quick and you want to work even quicker, you can do things like use a hair dryer or a fan or something like that. Hair dryers are nice with coils because you can just aim it at the bottom layers. You can also use a heat gun. But heat guns are a little too much. You want to be sure you don't catch anything on fire if you use a heat gun, and you risk drying things out a little too fast if you use a heat gun. Hair dryers are kind of my preference, or a fan if you don't care about just aiming it at the particular layers you want to dry. But yeah, you want to be sure you're letting each sort of section, like the lower section, dry as you keep building on top of it. If it keeps slumping down, or if you keep losing control, you're going to have, or it's because you're probably just working too fast and it's slumping. Maybe it's too thin, maybe you're using too much slip. There's that kind of stuff. But yeah, just think about that. But you're going to keep building. Remember to store between classes. You want to wrap up your piece really well in your plastic. We'll try to demo this in class for everybody, but if not, I just want to basically say or point out, yeah, you want to wrap, if it's a really particularly dry weekend, hot or super duper cold, if it's very dry, you might want to wrap clay or plastic all the way around your piece, like underneath it and over the top, because your board will actually dry out your pot just a little bit from the bottom. Coils, it actually kind of helps to do that though, because it starts drying out those lower levels. What else? But yeah, just wrap it, get really big. Don't try to use a bunch of small plastic bags. Try to use a large plastic bag over the top. You can even kind of open up your trash bag so it makes a really large sheet that you can wrap around. That's really handy. But yeah, and then you're gonna store it on your shelf and then come back, keep building, and it's gonna be just stinking awesome. One more, oh yeah, also, I already talked about in this, if your pot dries out on the bottom before you're totally getting it nice and clean, because as we talked about, you're going to let it dry more and more as it gets taller. So let's say you're finishing the top and the bottom's really dried out and you can't get it clean. Don't re-wet it. Use the Scotch-Brite to smooth it out. I'll talk about that more in class, but yeah, I'm trying to think if there's any other tips I have. I think I've covered it all. It's all good. If there's any others, I'll include them in the assignment, or attached in comments to this video or something like that. But there you go. That's how you get started on your coil piece, and just keep doing that and you'll have a beautiful, great big coil piece. Yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.